or if they've experienced accident conditions at their site of origin, which would require work before you can put them into transportation. And again, high burn-up fuel here for this initial application, license application. All the high burn-up fuel is canned, so as part of the accident analysis, it's assumed to redistribute itself. We don't, in this initial license application, we don't want to have to deal with high burn-up fuel issues that we're currently working through. Contingency plan if we do find a damaged or a failed canister once it's at the WCS site, consistent with what's in the materials license for S&M 2510, which is the Rancho Seco site, which is, other than this facility and some low-level waste that they have stored there, the reactor is gone. What we were going to propose is that we would take a leaking or suspected leaking canister and put it into a transportation cask. The transportation cask would provide confinement barriers to isolate any materials that might be leaking from the canister, and then we would develop a recovery plan based on specific conditions of the canister, and then upon evaluation take appropriate licensing actions to either revise transportation licenses to allow it to be shipped someplace if it couldn't be repaired there, do in-situ repair at the site. So those would be the things that we would look at. We would like to stress, however, that the confinement boundary in the license applicant in our licensing basis is that even under design basis accidents and such, confinement is always maintained, and the purpose of the aging management programs is to assure that confinement is always maintained. Next slide, please. All right, so SAR content is based on guidance from 1567 and Reg Guide 348, Rev 1. The table of contents for the SAR, we take those two documents and we came up with a table of contents, which I have to admit looks good on paper, but as we're writing it, we're making some adjustments here and there. But it pretty much follows the TSAR that DOE put together. So it pretty much follows that outline, which covers all the things that we believe you all are interested in. We have separate appendices for the new homes and NAC systems where we have specific evaluations. So, for instance, operations, we will put the design basis exposures and such into the main body of the SAR, but for each of the canister and transfer sites, we'll have an appendix that'll go through the specific operations for each of those systems and dose evaluations for each of those as an example. Similar to the Rancho Seco license, we plan to incorporate the canisters and storage pack designs by reference into the existing SARs, and then just perform that 212 type evaluation to demonstrate that the site conditions in West Texas are bounded by the analyses in those existing SARs. These are the chapters that we envisioned for the safety analysis report. I won't bore you to death by reading them. If you have any questions about what's in each of those sections, any of those sections or like that, then I'd be happy to answer those. But I don't tend to blather on long about the content. So, a summary of what we're proposing here is, again, our general licensing approach is the maximum use of existing licensed storage and transfer systems. We expect to have to perform minimal calculations to support the application, qualifying the MP197 cask as a transfer cask, doing the evaluations, the 212 type evaluations, and then the site-specific dose calculations and off-site dose calculations. This is the bulk of the work. We want to use approved aging management programs to continue the aging management for the canisters when they come. They'll be continued or initiated during storage at WCS based on the canister age, and high burn-up fuel that'll be at the site will be canned in this initial application. Transportation, again, is not part of this license application, but we went over what transportation costs and licenses we intend to use, and we envision that physical receipt inspection of the canister is only necessary if the canisters experience an accident condition along the way. And for the SAR, we're going to follow 1567 and Rig Guide 348 for its contents and layout.
Okay, I have a few questions, and I want to ask that folks, NRC folks and members of the public restrict the questions to the WCS application, not to ask questions about transportation because it's outside the scope of this application, and I'm sure we'll have future discussions about that in different venues. So, two questions. Receipt inspection only required if there's an event during transportation, and something that, from my standpoint, I had envisioned that there would be a receipt inspection done to establish a baseline for each canister or canister systems when it comes on site, and you could use that for continuing aging management program. Something to think about. I understand what you're saying in the statements, and not for discussion necessarily, but it seemed like it would be, in my mind, again, had it envisioned that would establish a baseline for each system as it came on site. The use of COC dose rates, and I assume for thermal too, you might have said something about thermal. It's one of the issues that we'll be looking at is when you think of a lot of systems sitting on the ground, and something I think we discussed during private fuel storage review is the thermal aspect of having several systems. You know, it's not just 5 or 10 or 20 systems sitting on the ground. So keep that in mind as you look at that thermal evaluation of all those systems, a high number of systems sitting on the ground even for phase 1 and for subsequent phases as well. We'll be looking at that. I don't have any answers for you, but just something that we'll have to talk about as we go forward and get our thoughts into that. Off-site shipment for repair, repackaging, I understand the purpose and the function of a transportation package versus a storage system. We'll have to talk about that further, and certainly if it occurs, not that it would occur, but if it occurs, then we'll want to talk about that at that point. We'll be very much involved. But I'm not sure today I'm comfortable with off-site shipment for repair, repackaging, but that's something that you have to think through if you have capabilities on-site for repair of the canister or the other systems, the non-canistered systems. So what chapter is receipt facility operations described in, or do you have that envisioned yet?
Can go back to the SAR chapters, one slide. There you go. That would be in the operating systems and operating procedures chapter. So it would be chapter 5, 4, and 5. 4 will describe the buildings and the facilities and such, and chapter 5 would provide the procedures. Okay,
good. And then you said it at least twice that all high burn-up fuel is canned, and I know, Mac, that's been a practice for the NAC systems. It doesn't have to be canned, but that's something that has been done, for I know, for the fuel that's been loaded. We have done several evaluations of storage and transportation systems and found that uncanned high burn-up fuel is safe to store for long periods of time and eventually transport for those systems we have approved. I just want to be very clear about that, but that's not required to can high burn-up fuel, but I know it's been done for the NAC systems. I think those, I know, something that we had been talking about internally, and where does the COC data sit? Where's the description of the COC systems? And we've talked about a couple of options. PFS actually kind of incorporated by reference the COC for the system that they were going to use for storage. Internal discussions, and we're still in those discussions to an extent, but I think where we're leaning towards is that the detail of those systems to be stored at the WCS site would be described in the application itself, not referred to externally. And again, if you think through that, we'll probably want to have another discussion in the future, pre-application meeting about that, of where they should sit and why, you know, we'll end up with one position over another. And I'll open it up for NRC folks if you have questions. Tony has a question.
Yeah, Tony, similar
what Mark was saying. Mark was mentioning the thermal effect, but when you have a large number of canisters sitting there at one of your pages on outside doses and occupational exposures, that's another consideration. In addition to thermal, the dose situation is also. So a few, you have quite a few there, and also the second bullet there is on your page 16 says phase 1 pad. Do you have different pads with different phases when you consider offset calculation?
So for the environmental report, we will look at all the pads.
Okay.
That's for the entire 40,000 metric tons as we envision it today, and do bounding calculations. But for the license application itself, it'll just when I say pad, there's going to be one area. The pad requirements for NAC systems are different than the pad requirements for new home systems. So it depends on the definition of pad. We'll call it an area. We'll have one area that'll have the two systems.
So you're really talking about one pad that covers both. You're talking about separate pads.
So we're talking about one area that will be in the security area.
Right.
But the actual concrete that his casks sit on will be different than the concrete that my casks sit on, and the apron in between will be different on top of that.
That's interesting about that. So they're still going to all be stored in a new homes type system, right? Horizontal system? No. Okay.
And just so we're clear, this is going to have the new, as I said, we're trying to keep the application as straightforward as possible.
Yes.
So it's really the physical transfer of the system in the same license system to WCS. There'll be a new homes row, if you will, and there will be a NAC row, if you will.
Separate pads.
Separate pads.
And I think in the next
phase within the area.
I used the wrong definition of pad.
No, that's okay.
I think in our next meeting we could probably bring drawings and that would be helpful just to visualize it.
Right. As you think of aging management programs, it might make sense to group them somehow by where they're coming from as well, the AMPs, so it's easier not only to be implementing the AMP itself, but for our folks that will come and inspect to know which sets are under each aging management program.
And that is our current plan.
Yeah, good.
The high-burner fuel, we're not required them to be canned in your application, but you only say initial license application you want them to be canned. Have you thought about when you're going to go to the allowed flexibility of uncanned high-burner fuel, or that's a decision later?
It's a good question. So and the way I would phrase it is that the targeted sites that we initially to get maximum impact on stranded sites, it turns out that the high burner fuel was canned.
Okay.
So I think that's maybe a better way to say it than we initially targeted not canning, because as Mark said, there's no safety issue with uncanned high burner fuel. The next phase, I think there's a lot of factors impact which systems we put in the next application based upon demand and utility interest. And I think that's something that we'd be looking at around the time that we anticipate the initial application to be approved in 2018, 2019. But there's a lot of different factors.
I just encourage all of us to really think long-term, because it's not a one-shot deal by 2020.
No.
You're done with phase 1. It's really 8 phases with a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
Including transportation as well.
Yeah. And that's why when we're doing the site dose calculations and things like that for the environmental impact and for the site, is to give us the maximum flexibility. So if we're bounding the general licenses and the site-specific license where the fuel is coming from, that gives us the maximum flexibility once we get to the site. Okay. And that's why we're taking that approach.
Right. Okay, thanks. On your discussion on the contingency plan for damaged and failed canisters, who will make that decision, and what criteria do you have to say, well, this is damage or suspect damage?
So as part of the aging management, that's one of the things you're looking for as suspected canisters based on aging management inspections. And so if one is identified, there'll be site monitoring. So if there's some off-normal event where we're picking up dose or that we don't expect, then we would start looking. And so those sorts of things give you indications, and we would go looking for suspect canisters and then isolate that canister until a plan can be generated to deal with it.
Okay, so I understand. So let me put a plug in, another plug. Okay. Because you're going to own the aging management program for each one of those systems that comes on site. I would encourage you to think that you may want to establish a baseline for each one that comes on site, do an inspection of each one, just because someone else has implemented aging management program for those systems before. Now you're going to own that AMP at your site. I just would encourage you to think that maybe it is a benefit of establishing a baseline for each one.
Inspection is an important aspect of this whole operation once you start the operation, not only licensing but operation. Let me back up a little bit. Have you thought about this decision made who will possess spent fuel or who will have title to spent fuel? You may not have an answer now, but that's the question.
I'll answer that one. So for the WCS as the applicant, our expectation is that DOE will take title to it at the utility, and so it will be under DOE title from the utility through transportation and remain DOE's in storage at WCS. Okay. So we'll have physical possession of it, and the DOE will have title to it.
From this already at the site down, not WCS site, wherever you
at the utility site.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other NRC folks? David, I see you reaching.
Okay, I have a few questions. If you turn to page 7, you talk about canisters 61BT and 61BTH. Are they deployed at the strand sites for these 12 or 9 sites, or they are just some reference point for your discussion?
Oyster Creek is a site that's going to be shut down, and they have both 61BT and 61BTH canisters at that site.
How about Rancho Seco?
Rancho Seco is the site-specific license, and they have the FOFCs and FF.
If you go to page 8, that reference table, I know Jack, I'm sorry. No, Jack didn't spend time on it, but if you go to page 8, maybe? 6. That's 6. Sorry. I'm sorry, 6. I'm sorry. Small print. This gives a sort of Rosetta Stone of system, license, and site. Is that helpful?
Okay, great.
Millstone Unit 1 in Oyster Creek that currently have the 61BT or 61BTH canisters.
I recognize that those canisters are also at PPL in Brunswick and Duane Arnold, but we identified the shutdown sites because we feel that the impact and benefit of the interim storage is to clear the shutdown sites. But first, right, but the application does not contain, except the Rancho Seco, a site-specific citation. It is under the TSC general license, but it just happened to encompass those shutdown sites you see on the graph.
Okay, good. Page 10. What? Page number 10. See, I've heard you talk about the qualified for seismic COC 1004 return period, 1,000 years. So that means it was a pretty low seismic challenge. Was that correct?
That's a 10,000.
10,000.
10,000 years.
Okay, good.
But the seismic activity out there is very low. 1,004 license, more than bounds it.
Okay, good. Okay, I have a few questions for Max Systems. Page 12. So I noticed that you talk about some kind of stationary or mobile canister transfer facility. That was a picture in the middle.
That's correct.
And I look into your, say, COC, so Max Systems attachment, appendix B, so on and so forth. So there are a number of these terminologies being tossed around, like mobile mobile frame, lifting devices, and transporters and cranes. So I just want to make sure that this particular design because this will be a site-specific, say, application, see all these intended functions and the safety classifications are properly evaluated.
That's correct. The full analysis would be included in the SAR.
And is this going to be a crane or some lifting device or something else? Do you have any idea as what you have presented, you have conceived?
It's almost yes to all those questions because it's going to be able to both lift and translate. So it's hydraulic. It's a hydraulic system that's capable of lifting.
Okay, I understand in general, and since you mentioned in your say Appendix B to COC in general in the next system, there are say B30.5 for mobile cranes and say B30.2 for overhead crane, gantry crane, and a few other citations, NUREC 0612. They're very much mixed. I think it eventually will apply to the new home systems as well. So pay attention to that, what exactly you have, and classifications and by bases, and that will help the evaluations.
The package that you see here has been analyzed, and we follow NUREC 0612, NUREC 0554. We've implemented NOG1s and B3020s and then 14.6 in the entire system. Okay,
I think in general, see this kind of system, see when you place a purchase order, like purchase specifications, there are a description as to what kind of testing ought to be performed at the factory and what kind of operating testing configurations and a few others, whether they will involve say annual or periodic inspections, and how these inspections, whether they are just they're not part of the design and the fabrication for these say lifting devices. It has been pretty challenging for inspectors to look into say systems like this. So I would just ask you to be very mindful as to what kind of design specifications you have and corresponding to inspection procedures and all these the needed contents there.
You understand?
I just have to add that in anticipation of some of these issues for these lifting devices, we've been drafting up draft technical specifications for your consideration, and we're referencing the portions of those codes and such that we think that you will want to tie us to in the technical specifications to assure that we're going to meet those requirements and assure the safety of these lifts.
Yeah, thank you. I have one more question. Page 17. You talk about the confirmatory evaluations for 72-12. See, there's no guidance, standard review plan guidance similar to that in our operation, because 72-12 basically is part of the, general license for them to configure, and we have auditing, role to look into what they did. Okay, for your application to rely on this type of process to get your safety analysis report done, it's going to be, first of a kind for us to look into what you can come up with, talking about, safety review, experience at the staff side. So I just want to make sure that we understand what you try to package and the reconciliation, what do you mean by that? You have to be as explicit as possible, because we don't generally follow, 72-12 evaluations that closely, even though we know what we want. So be very, very mindful about.
The reason that's my terminology, I was just trying to convey the type of analysis you'll expect to find in the SAR. We're not going to have a section called 72212, but that's the type of analysis that will be there for your review.
We actually debated this internally. Maybe there's a better terminology. And as you say, as we go forward, and hopefully these type of facilities become more common, perhaps there's a better term or a better process that we could define. But you're right, it's not 72212, but there's no Part 50 license, but it's a similar approach. Maybe that's something to clarify. Yeah, methodology.
Okay. We're struggling with what to call it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Vera. Is this on? No. There you go. Is this on? No?
Can't really hear.
This is John Vera. I'm the acting chief of the licensing branch. I want to go back to AMPs a second. You state that you want to incorporate approved AMPs as they are approved. Just think about some of those AMPs that might not be applicable specifically to your site. You might need to do some addition to those AMPs, and then they would have to come in for our review. You're probably on the hook if you have any canisters that hit that period of renewal and don't have an approved AMP. So you might want to limit your initial scope to canisters that have already AMPs that have been approved with your initial application. Make sense?
We would push some of the packages way out in time, only because some packages were loaded earlier, and like Zion in particular is just loaded. It won't be looking for amps for another 18 years, 20 years. So,
right. So you would start with that.
Right. So we're just trying to find a way to take the ones that are fully covered with an amp, some that are in kind of straddling between almost getting an amp and some that won't need an amp in for the near future. So if we keep the amps tied to the individual license, which is part of the license renewal process, then each of the packages on the site will be tied to an amp whenever it's implemented. And only the site SAR would have to be updated to implement that. Just identify the fact that the CFC's been revised wherever we make it sit, and the license that's attached as an appendix now has amps in place for it.
How about canisters from site-specific licenses?
So the only site-specific license we're looking at right now in this initial application will be the Rancho Seco site, and the canisters that are there are based on the 1004 license. They're tube and disc type canisters that have more discs, but they're made of the same materials and put together the same way, and the shells are similar to what's in the 1004 license. So what we're going to propose is that they be treated using the 1004 license aging management program, because as far as the aging management program goes, what we have in 1004 eventually will bound those canisters because they're similar, and the Rancho Seco site could be qualified to store fuel under 1004. So the 1004 will qualify the initial site.
But you'd like to add that the 1004, rightly or wrongly, it's a very broad license. They got 17 different sites, maybe a dozen canister types, marine, non-marine. So by covering that, we feel it will completely encompass the canisters that would come to WCS from the new home side, and obviously the site itself would be bounded by the other sites covered by it.
Okay. I'm sorry, John, you bring up a good point, though, and John brought up a good point that the AMPs may need additional requirements. They might warrant fewer requirements. If it's coming from a marine site to Texas, you might look at to reduce regulatory burden and focus on safety items that are really more important in Texas. You might look at customizing them to actually delete requirements as well.
We're looking forward to those discussions of how we implement the aging management program. And we're going to have some more meetings specifically on that to to make sure that we're on the same page. I have my ideas. You're saying things that call into question my ideas now.
Well, but I think it's an interesting, and maybe to get beyond the scope of this, but the idea of a learning and aging management program would probably adapt to, even under general license, might adapt to site-specific conditions. As you said, might get more rigorous, might relax, and so there might be a natural divergence based on the site. That's an interesting point.
This is Al Thomas from NRC. Dovetail to what Mark was saying and what you were saying. The learning aging management program, I think that the baselining or getting some more inspection information would be very